after they get him, he comes forth and they say, قالوا, they said to him, أأنت فعلت هذا? Are you the one that did this? بآلهتنا يا إبراهيم, with our deities, with our idols, O Abraham, Ya Ibrahim. And he said, again, he had set this up very nicely, yet very elementary and very simple. What do you say? قال بل فعله. Who did it? كبيرهم, the big one. He's got the axe around his neck. Why don't you ask him? I have nothing to do with this. He's the greatest God amongst all of them, right? And he said, you should ask them if they're the ones that actually speak, right? Now we have to pause at this, is why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mention, ask them, inhum yantiqun, if they're the ones that are able to speak, right? Because speech actually says, if you can construct a good sentence, that means you have a sound intellect on a certain level, right? If you can construct a full sentence and be very confident with that and carry on a conversation, that means his mind is working and he doesn't have any issues, right? So he says what? Since they do speak, right? Why don't you ask them? فَرَجْعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ, and then they go back to themselves. It's like, wait, I think he's got a point here, right? So they go back to themselves, get in their huddle, and they say, wait, how are we supposed to ask? They're trapped, right? إِنَّكُمْ أَنْتُمْ الظَّالِمُونَ. So now they start accusing themselves. It's like, wait, you're the one that set this up, you did this, and they start having a little argument from amongst themselves, right? That just by this spark of a question that asks them if they're the ones that speak, and they say, okay, let's huddle up and see what we can do about this, because it's a dilemma, right? And then they start asking about it amongst themselves. They start arguing amongst themselves. They start accusing one another. You guys are wrongdoers. You guys are wrongdoers, right? And then after all of that, they come back to Ibrahim alayhi salam. And they say, you know what? This thing that you're talking about and this change you want to bring about and the difference you want to make, you're insulting our forefathers here. And Ibrahim alayhi salam wants to switch all of this. And he says what? He says, it's no direct disrespect to your forefathers because they had a certain tradition. But if you're constructing idols with your own hands and then you're calling it your deity, that becomes my obligation to help you think and use that mental faculty that your Creator has given you, right? قَالَ أَفَتَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَنْفَعُكُمْ. Are you guys worshipping actually something that doesn't bring any benefit to you, right? Now after all of this, and he says this is a tough crowd, and now they're saying that no, you know what, we're not having any of this. You listen, if you, like we told you before, if you start talking like this, it's going to get you killed, right? And what do? They said, let's give him the worst torture that any human can bear, which is what? Let's burn him. So what do they say? They said, قَالُوا حَرِّقُوهُ وَانْصُرُوا آلِهَتَكُمْ. They said, whoever wants to fight in the name of your lords, gather as much firewood as you can. So they made an announcement. They said, we're burning this individual who is very blasphemous and he's disrespected our forefathers. Everyone gather whatever you can. This is the order from the high court. This is the order from your priests. This is the order from whoever wants to aid your gods, your idols, right? Gather all the firewood you can. All the elites are gathering their firewood. All of the children are gathering their firewood. Everyone's gathering their firewood, right? And now this firewood is in such a way that the hadith of Muhammad ﷺ mentions that if this fire was, if there was to be a bird that was to go over this flame, even if it was in the sky, because they let this fire sit for a long time, meaning that they put all of their power and their strength towards this fire, and that even Muhammad ﷺ said if there was a bird that was to fly even at the level of the sky, that bird would what? Become a kebab, right? It would become a shawarma, right? And basically it would die in the process, be burnt. So the narrators of the hadith mentioned that Muhammad says that this fire, it wasn't only for one day. Some narrations say it burnt for a few days, right? And even the people, they kept on moving back and back and back and building all this firewood. So imagine a whole town of people make a fire, right? If you make a campfire, if you're, 10 feet away from it, you still feel the heat, right? They said the people who were responsible for this fire, their face was black from the smoke because that's how much firewood there was. So they said, you know what, this fire is so crazy, we can't bring him to it because we're going to feel the heat and get burnt in the process. We have to find a way to throw him into this fire. So what do? What is that engineer you guys were talking about? It's actually said, Wallahu alam, but some of the hadith mentioned that the first people to design a catapult were from that time, from Babylon, of what is contemporary Iraq right now, the people of Ibrahim. So this engineer, they put him inside of this catapult, right? And they said, okay, let's move him back. And they said even the smoke from where we had the catapult from far away was actually burning us too, or it was changing the color of our clothes and our skin. So they catapulted him into the fire. And we all heard this story when we were little kids, right? Now, Muhammad says something amazing about our father Ibrahim alayhi salam. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of time, stopped time for Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? Sometimes you don't think about it, but time is actually a creation, right? That we are bound by, not our creator, right? So a lot of times people, atheistic questions sometimes, they may say, or individuals who may not believe that there is a creator, they say, if God created everything, what was before God? If God created everything, what was before, or who created God? Now, there's something called an incorrect question. Let me ask you something. If I was to say, if a male gave birth to a child, what would the gender be? If a male gave birth to a child, what would the gender be? What do you think? What do you think?
It's an incorrect question.
Yes. How'd you figure that out? Yes, very good. You're right. The same thing is when you say that the creator, what was before him, you're bounding him by time, which means you haven't understood what a creator is yet. If you understand that he is the one that created time, he's not bound by it, and he created as a creation like anything else for us to be, if you want to say, hanging by or be dangling to, then that's what it is. But that is the as Muslims understand, the epitome of an incorrect question, or as monotheists understand the epitome of an incorrect question, because you're limiting him by something you're limited by, which means that you have this limited being that's trying to fathom the reality of the unlimited. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the world, gave us nice little hints here and there of his creation. You see a tree, is that evidence left behind that somebody made something, or does the tree come and vanish, come to its creation by itself? This table that I'm sitting on over here, I don't know who made it, but I know somebody made it. I know all these things from hard raw material come together and make itself, but I know somebody had to make it, right? And that's the same logic that Ibrahim alayhi salam is being used with here, which is time. Ibrahim alayhi salam, now Jibreel alayhi salam says to him, if you want me to free you from this, there's no issue. Your creator has frozen time for you, and now if you want to be alleviated from this issue, you can be alleviated from this issue. And he says, what does Ibrahim alayhi salam say? Do you guys remember what he says? Anybody? No? It's fine if you don't. He says what? That my creator is enough for me and he knows what he wants. Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. Right? And Jibreel alayhi salam says, okay, fine. Goes away. He goes and he gets catapulted in this fire, and they're like, oh yeah, now he's burning. This one individual that dared to question the intellect, now he's burning. We got rid of this dilemma, right? And they said they waited and waited and waited because they didn't want to go into the fire for it to go down. Couldn't be extinguished. After the fire dies down, they go towards the fire, right? And what do they see? There's two different narrations from the hadith of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One is that qa'imun yusalli, that he's standing and he's praying to his creator. And the only thing that actually burnt on him was the things that he was chained by. So he was free from that. And the other is that he's walking away now out of this fire. And they're like, and out of that there was one believer. Do you guys know who that believer was from there? His cousin, Lut alayhi salam. One person followed him from that, who chose to see that as a miracle, and that was Lut alayhi salam. Right? And if you guys want, inshallah, sometime we could have a seerah on Lut alayhi salam, which is an amazing seerah. His cousin, Lut. So now they say, whoa, did that just happen? So now they take him again, making a long story short because you have to get the question and answer. They take him the second time to Nimrod, right? And he says, okay, everyone's getting excited and talking about this whole thing that you got out of the fire, whatever. What's this thing you're talking about? Because from what I know, right, I am responsible for these people, so I am the God in a certain way, right? And the Quran depicts this very nicely. And what does it say? He says, my Lord, الَّذِي يُحْيِي وَيُمِيتُ. He's the one that brings life and brings death. And Nimrud says, well, you know what, I'm God too then. Everybody listens to me, everybody worships me, they listen to whatever I say. He says, go bring 2 men from the jail. They bring 2 men. He kills one, he goes, see, I was able to give death. And what does he do after that? He said, you're free. He said, I let one live. So I'm God. He says, okay, let me get this. This is Ibrahim alayhi salam. Let me get this from an angle that is so simple that a child can understand, something that you don't have control over. He said, my Lord brings the sun from the east to the west. I want you to bring it up from the west to the east. فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. And astonished and amazed with this individual, like, wow, I'm bound by the sun. When the sun goes down, that's my way to know that I have to go to sleep. When you look outside, even right now, the way that our Creator designed us is that nobody likes to be woken up with a light, right, in the middle of their sleep. So Allah turns off the lights in the sky for us, right? So it's natural for you to sleep. And when that sun comes to your eyes, like, oh, it's time for me to wake up. I'm late for Fajr. I'm late for prayer. Oh my God, I woke up with the rays of the sun, with the ray of the sun in my eyes, right? So we have this natural alarm clock that we can see, and it's very elementary. A 3-year-old, a 4-year-old can understand. When the sun comes up, I have to be awake. I have to work. When the sun goes down, I have to go to sleep. It's bedtime, right? So Nimrud, he's like, wow, it's so easy, but how do I even debate this? I don't have control over that, right? This is where we stop a part of this presentation and we pause and we see what? There's a few things we have to understand. Is sometimes the most obvious thing is right underneath your nose, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam's first thing, his father was the one who was responsible for creating. He was a manufacturer of these idols, and he gave it special traits. He gave the one with the big ears, right? And all Abrahamic faiths believe this. The one with the big ears, this is the one that had sound knowledge. This is what Abraham's father believed, right? So if he's the one that created it with the big ears, with his own hands, who created him? First thing, right? But Ibrahim alayhi salam said to him, oh father, this thing, no disrespect, ya abati, this thing that you're creating, can you hear what you're saying? Who made this thing? I made it. So now he's trying to make him think. But what happens to us sometimes, and Allah protect any of us to fall into this trap, is that we are raised in a certain way sometimes, or we're used to certain principles. A person is a product of their environment, right? But sometimes it's very hard to question tradition, because if you answer the correct answer, or the answer that's universally understood as a fact, you have a responsibility now, right? You have a responsibility. Other thing is, you have to go against tradition. Sometimes your mind starts thinking. This is what actually happened to Ibrahim alayhi salam's qawm. They started thinking and started debating amongst each other. But then when they came to one party said, hey, you know what, I think he's right. They said, are you going to go against our forefathers? No, we're not going to go against our forefathers. You're right, he's wrong, let's throw him in the fire. You see how that lapse occurred? That problem occurred where the aql, the intellect is addressed properly, and then there's something else that clothes it and cloaks it, right? And if we learn something from the intellectual legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam, it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us what is something very easy to work with, which is this intellect. And a lot of times it has the right answer, especially for belief. Maybe not for legislation, right, from the Quran and the Sunnah. But as far as understanding who your creator is, and if you have a creator, you're given all the faculties. And you don't even have to look far away. And I'm going to conclude with this, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He says, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. And within yourselves is the biggest sign. Don't you see أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ? Let's divide this ayah into two things, right? Allah says, number one, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ, meaning that you don't even have to look at the celestial bodies and the Milky Way being 1/1000th of that celestial of the celestial bodies, and we just share that in the smallest star amongst our solar system is the sun, and those stars that we see far away are actually bigger than the sun, and that's just one galaxy, and then maybe billions of galaxies like that. Forget all of that amazingness, right? Just look inside yourself. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. Don't you see? Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala end this verse off with, don't you see this sight? Why? We can think of many hikmahs, right? Let's start off on a superficial level, and then we'll talk about an intellectual level, and then a very deep spiritual level, right? Why is it that even if you go outside right now, or if it gets negative 80 degree wind chill, or negative 20 degrees, right? Why is it that everything that we're going to be covering is our skin, but not our eyes? How come our eyes don't freeze? How come our eyes don't freeze? Right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it with that amazing balance of saline that no matter what happens, it's very hard, as long as your heart is pumping, for your eyes to freeze. So that you can see where you're going, so that you can get hidayah, guidance. Right? Do you think it's some type of play on words that He wants you to get guidance and sight is related to it? Or is there something very spiritually and very intellectually driven in this? The second thing is that how is it possible that this eye that we have depicts something into this glob of fat sitting inside of our cranium, and we make sense of it? How is it possible that a glob of fat connected to a bunch of nerves depicts a picture onto it, and it translates it, and you make sense of it? وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. The eye is the gateway to everything. If somebody doesn't have eyesight, may Allah protect us from that fitna, you're hidden from a humongous portion of reality, right? But how is this possible that I'm looking at this individual, I see that he's wearing an orange C, I can make sense of it, and it stands for the Bears, right? I don't know why he's wearing it. No, I was joking. But no, I like the Bears too, man. It's all good, right? But how is that possible that my mind made sense of that, and a glob of fat made sense of it? It translated to me, and it made me react to it. All on a glob of fat? Do you think, how do you logically explain that? How do you logically explain that fat translates everything, senses, balances, chemical imbalances, whatever you want to call it? How do you make sense of you hearing something in your brain, a glob of fat has to register that, you make sense of it, and if it's sad news or if it's traumatic news, your heart starts pumping because of this glob of fat, or if it's happy, you can even have tears of joy. How is that possible? How do you explain that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a creator, and He wants something from us. We have a creator. You can say science created that, right? But who created that science in the first place, right? Or you to even have those mental faculties to come out with new modern day science, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this intellect to use, in the Sharia, the Quran and the Sunnah are addressing the intellect directly. Which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is my favorite ayah in the Quran, is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hashr, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Don't be like those who forgot Allah, for Allah made them forget themselves. When you forget your creator, what happens? You forget yourself. When you forget yourself, you do things like what? You would maybe worship an idol, even though you're greater than it. But you worship and you devote your whole life to an idol, right? Because you've forgotten yourself. So knowing yourself, it goes reverse too. The tafsir of the ayah is, the more you know yourself properly, in a holistic, proper, natural way, the more you're going to know your creator. So every idea, every thought process that comes to us, it has to go through that natural, intellectual thing that Allah has created us with, which is the aql, right? And with that I conclude, inshallah, wa akhir da'wan, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. If you have any questions, anything to add about Ibrahim alayhi salam or his legacy, please do, inshallah. No? You guys gonna let me go that easily? I hope so. Shoot, it's cold out there. You guys gonna let me go? Alright. Any question, any discussion question, even if it's off topic, no problem, inshallah. Anything that has to do with fiqh, no problem. My actual specialty is actually in fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, and legal law and regulation derived from the Quran and Sunnah. So if you want to ask any legal issues as far as the Quran and Sunnah are concerned, no problem. I should do this more often. You guys are easy. Yes, go ahead.
I'm just kind of thinking about.
Yes.
So the last part you talked about where, Kareem Lasani is facing off, so to speak, with the tyrant of his day.
Yes.
And you mentioned before that, like, he was like basically like a nobody.
Yes.
We hear a lot of times, and especially to people our age, is that pretty much keep quiet until you become someone of status. And then,
Yes.
Then you can speak the truth or whatever.
Very true. We hear that all the time, yes.
Can you kind of dissect that?
Yes, Jazakallah khairan. So the main thing is that us as Muslims, and generally any way of life that came down, one of the main principles were, and the Quran talks about this very heavily, is al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar, is that we encourage good and we forbid and we discourage evil, right? And that can go on many realms and many wavelengths. But if I see, and that's the reason why I brought up the story of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Jahl, is that no matter who it is, what is right has to be you have to be vocal with it, right? And whatever is incorrect, you have to be vocal about it, right? And it has to be, you have to go about it in a very mature, in a very professional way. So if you have an individual that is very oppressive, you have to talk to them. You have to let them know, hey, listen, and whatever the consequences may be, right? It's one thing if you're afraid for your life and you don't want to do it, the excuse is there. But there has to be a selected group of individuals that have to stomach the responsibility and say, you know what, if this oppression is occurring and this wrong is occurring, somebody has to step up to him, or as a group even, but at least an individual has to go up to them and say, listen, this is incorrect for whatever reason. I know you may have some monetary reasons involved in this. You may have some whatever reasons involved in this, but this is incorrect. Right? And you can't be doing this anymore, so return his money back. As Muhammad said to Abu Jahl, you have his money? Yes. Then give his money back. You know what I'm saying? So we can't let, as far as encouraging the good and forbidding the evil, we can't let many times society dictate. We can let society dictate how we go about it, but it still has to be done. Right? If I have a way of correcting people, and if I was born and raised, for instance, in Russia or in Alaska or in India, for instance, that same way of correction may not be applicable to this geographical location of Chicago, right? I may have to use a better way of doing it because I need to make sure that I change what's happening, right? Change in the best and most optimal, noble way, right? So yes, I mean, that's how I see it, and that's what I understood of what you wanted to elaborate on. Is that kind of what you were talking about? Yes, inshallah. But the main thing is, the main verse for that is Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. That Allah says, Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhriyat lin-nas. You were the best ummah that was raised from mankind, the best nation that was raised from mankind. What's the condition? Ta'muruna bil ma'ruf, that you encourage good and you what? Discourage evil. Right? So that's the thing that raises you at that level. If you don't do that, then there's no point in claiming that you're from a certain ummah, right? Anything else? Anything else? And just because I gave the lecture doesn't mean that I covered everything. If you guys feel that there's something that was missing, please do, because I'll benefit from that too, inshallah. Yes. What role? Yes, what is destiny in what role? In what role? I couldn't hear what you said. To what extent does destiny play a role? Okay. As far as Islam is concerned, this is what is referred to as al-qada wal-qadr, right? Al-qada is basically what your creator... Let me backtrack a little bit, so it makes the foundation easier. Many times we say that, oh my God, this happened to me, and there's all of this bloodshed or all of this oppression happening in the world. There's no way that we could have a creator because there's so much mischief on this earth. For instance, that's one role it plays. The other thing is, and this is what drove people away from the fold of Islam itself, is because there's something they tried to comprehend, that how is it that my creator knows everything, but then if I do wrong, he's judging me for it and I have to go to hell for that, right? That's kind of what the end result of what you're kind of implying, right? Good. So the first thing is that if our Creator created and He says that there is something called qadr but you're not going to understand, right? It fully, but it's there. A good way to explain it is this. There's two spheres of control, right? There's one sphere that I have full control over. I can walk up to this individual and I can tap him on the shoulder, right? But let's say I'm driving now and I get sideswiped and I had no control of it and it's not in my sphere of control. How do I make sense of this as a human being, right? What do I do with this? The latter is something you didn't have control over. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we learn from the Quran and Sunnah, nothing happens except with the permission of your Creator. So if something happens with the permission of your Creator and is not in your control, then that is a test for you. Why? How? We will never know, but we know it's a test. Just because you don't know the reason why, it doesn't mean it's incorrect. Right? Now, the other thing is that somebody has control over something. Now, someone's going to say, well, it was written that he was going to go hit somebody. That's unfair. That means that this Creator that you're talking about is forcing somebody to do something on the face value. Maybe a good argument on the face value, right? So if I go to Hatib and I tap his shoulder, well, it was written for you, and I can shove him now, right? Or I can shove Abdullah, right? And now he's going to be like, whoa, but it was written for you, so guess what? This God that you're talking about, He forced you to do this, right? That's not the fact. The fact is that if you claim that your Creator is all-knowing and He's not bound by time and He's the one that created time for us to be bound by, if you're claiming He's all-knowing, does He know everything? If you're making the claim, then yes. Does it mean He wanted that thing to happen or He put you in a scenario to test you? Yes. Does He know what's going to happen? Yes. Does He want it to happen? No. But that's where your test is, right? If He's the one, and this is where the dilemma comes in, is that we may come from certain backgrounds or understand certain traditions, certain philosophies, that if God is loving and everything's about love and love and love, how can something bad happen then? Right? It's because that we've ingrained in our tradition that everything's about love and this God can't do anything that doesn't pertain to love, then there's no such thing as a God. That's something that we built as a tradition or as a principle and we live by it, right? But if our Creator is telling us that I created you because I wanted to, but I'll give you a reason. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, Allah says. I haven't created you except for the reason for worship, right? So that's the reason. And it can come in many forms. You going to school and learning a livelihood to educate yourself is a type of worship, right? So now if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you haven't been created except for worship, and you think now that you can question your Creator, and you can question. But who is going to hold, and I'm not meaning this in an oppressive connotation, if your Creator decided to create you because He wanted to, and you see all of the evidence around you that there is a Creator, and it leads you to your Creator, right? Who's going to question Him why He did something? Are you going to stand up and say, oh God, I question you that you did something? You can try. It doesn't take away the fact that everything around you has a Creator. You can say that, why is this happening to me and this and that? You know what? I don't believe there's a God because this can't happen to somebody. Well, the paradigm of Islam is now this, as we're talking about trials and tribulations, hardship and bloodshed. If we're talking about bloodshed and why is there so much oppression in the earth, did God actually do that? Or did Allah say in the Quran, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran is saying, if you want to know the end of times, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ, that it is now apparent that there's all types of mischief on the earth and in the sea of what the hands of man has committed. Right? So how has the hands of man committed this? First of all. And then we could prove, is it God that's doing this oppression or is it human beings that's doing this oppression? And then we're going to find out, why is He giving permission to them to do this if He has control over everything? We can answer all of that, inshallah. And if I go over the time limit, you guys let me know. Right? Why is it? Yes?
In terms of like the end of time, there's a period in which everyone becomes Muslim.
Yes. Just let me answer that question. I'm not done with the answer, but I'm going to get to you. I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off. So now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we say that ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ, let's look at poverty for instance, right? Why does poverty exist in the first place? Let's think rationally. Let's use this intellect that we've been created with, right? Whether you believe in a Creator or not, we do agree that we have intellect, right? And we're bound by that. Why is there poverty on this earth? Why is it that there are certain countries that have the most diamonds in their soil, for instance, like Sudan, and the richest of oil, but they're one of the most impoverished countries in the world? Why is it that they're not utilizing that? I would say, hey, why don't you guys get an education and start utilizing what's in your earth, in your land, to make your land better? But no, we have other individuals that believe in something called scarcity. Ideology of capitalism is based off scarcity, which means that there's so much scarcity that you have to take anything you can, and the ends justify the means. If you look up the philosophy, because every ideology has a philosophy, the philosophy of capitalism is what? Scarcity. That even though it's not a fact that you don't have oil in your own country and you have all these, but you know what? We have to behave like a scarcity, and we got the biggest muscles, so we have control to take whatever we want. And about them, you know what? Tough luck. They don't have muscles as big as us. They're just going to have to live with this while we get rich, and guess what? They get poor because they don't have guns, they don't have muscles, right? And you take away from them what they have, and now maybe the select individual of that country is a billionaire, but everybody else in that country is impoverished. Now, did God do that, or the hands of people? Murders. Why do murders occur? Right? Same thing. Did God give this individual a knife to cut his meat with? Yes. Now he can use that same knife to misuse to stab somebody and take their money or hold them up, right? So the Creator gave us properties attached with these realities, up to us how we use it. But we can't blame the Creator who created everything and tested us with it, and we commit the crime and say, oh, there's no God because there's atrocities, right? It doesn't happen. But let me tell you one thing, even us as Muslims and other religions that came before, there's certain elements, and I was talking this about to the guys before the talk, is that there's an amr ta'abbudi. Even Muhammad ﷺ didn't know why there were 2 rak'at in Salat al-Fajr, why there were 4 rak'at in Salat He even said, I don't know the reason why. It's ta'abbudi. My Creator tells me to do it, it's submission. So that brings us to the original point is, have you taken your faith on a leap of faith or with a conviction? Are you convinced? Did you say, you know what, I'm going to join this religion or close my eyes and hopefully I'm right? Because then everything's going to seem weird to you. Right? You ever hear about that thing that, it's a funny thing of my time, you know, in the late 80s and early 90s. Don't get caught with your foot in the sink, right? Meaning you're doing wudu, right? And you have your foot in the sink. Let's say at a McDonald's and somebody walks in like, well, never mind, dude, whatever. Everyone has the right to do whatever they want, right? Don't get caught. But now it may be awkward to have you get caught with your foot in the sink, but guess what? There's other principles that override the opinions of individuals, which is your Creator. You're doing it for Him. But if you don't understand why you're doing it, you take your deen on a leap of faith, and every time somebody walks in, oh, dude, you know what, man, I have a foot infection. My foot got cut, so I'm just washing my foot, dude. I know it's awkward, dude. I think it's awkward too. And guess what? You felt ashamed because you're not convinced. You took your faith on a leap of faith. But if you take your faith fully convinced with the intellect, not with textual evidences, your Creator is not telling you to become Muslim or Christian or Jew or Buddhism based on text. He's saying be a worshipper of your Creator and then see what He gives you in return to be a creator, to be the created and worship your Creator, right? So if you're fully convinced, and I always like to say this to my high school students. As of right now, I teach high school students, and I say to them, and this is a story that was given to me when I was in high school too, and I love this story, and it's very simple. Who here is originally from India or Pakistan? Who here is originally from Saudi Arabia, or Arab speaking, I should say, right? Who here is from, I don't see any Chinese. Who here is from anywhere else other than these 2 countries, or these 2 areas? Where are you from? Albania, all right. Bangladesh, Kita khabar, right? I don't know anything about, only know 2 words from Albanian, which is kiek, which means ugly, right? Or kiech. I have some Albanian students, they taught me, right? Kiech, there you go. It means, oh, bad, okay, they taught me it means ugly. All right, so anyways, I got to go talk to them. But what I tell them is the same story that was told to me, is that let's say you're coming back from a dawat, right? And you went to this dawat, you had your biryani, right? Or your makluba or feta, whatever. Kushari if you're Masri, right? And it's 11 o'clock at night. You're all full. You're like, man, I can't wait to get sleep, right? Your dad opens the door, being the shield of the house, of the family. He has the keys. He opens the door. You guys walk in. You're about to take your coat out. You're like, What's that smell? You smell something. And you look on your coffee table, there's a cigarette and it's half lit. Now, everybody looks at that cigarette and they're like, wait, what's the first thing they think? What's the first thing they think? Someone was here. Someone was here. Now, if I say to you, what's your name? Farhan. If I say to Farhan, right? May Allah make you Farhan. Farhan means happy, right? So, if I say to Farhan, you know what? No. There is a tendency now of cigarettes lighting themselves up, opening themselves out of a package, and a lighter coming, lighting them up, sitting on the ashtray, on the coffee table, and being halfway burnt. You're crazy if you think somebody was in your house. Like, dude, I don't know, but where I came from, that's a universally understood fact that things don't become in this, in this way and light themselves, and I'm going to disagree with you. You can say that to me. Now, if the whole world says to you, you know what, Farhan, you're crazy. Cigarettes light themselves. You're like, no, they don't. You're going to be against the whole world. You'll probably die for that reason to prove a point, that cigarettes don't come and light themselves. Right? Because you have a universally understood intellect that tells you that this thing doesn't happen on its own. Right? Now, let's address our intellects now. What about the human being himself? What about the original creation? What about the trees? What about the billions of galaxies? Forget billions of stars. Billions. Do you think there's evidences that someone created to say, hey, someone created this? I wonder who that is? That's the only two questions you have to ask. Who created this? And I wonder who created it. That will lead you to your creator without a leap of faith. But if you say, and you become arrogant, and you say, it all happened on its own on accident, that means that you've misunderstood your intellect to a degree that you think your mind has so much information that you are not in need of understanding universally understood things, and you have to form an opinion based on that. Right? And that's how Islam, that's how Allah teaches us in the Quran to see individuals that would say. And again, even when discourse occurs, you have to be very nice. Doesn't mean you have the right to do anything just because they don't believe in a creator, right? But you have to bring them and save them to a certain level to say, listen, things don't happen on their own. Where did this come from? How did this happen? If you ask how this happened and who that creator is, by default, a 5-year-old child, the fitrah, will understand it just as they understand the cigarette not lighting themselves. Then you haven't taken your deen on a leap of faith. Then let's see. What has this creator left for me? Did he send anyone or messengers? What did he send them with to convince me? I'd be convinced. I'm a stubborn human being. What did he send to them to convince me? And what's my duty and responsibility once I get that message? Right? So that's kind of how I would address that issue, inshallah. Yes. What was your name again? Mujahid. Tafadhal.
So in the end of time, right, there's a period of time.
Okay.
So my question is that before Dajjal comes or after?
Wallahu alam, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. That has to do more with aqidah. I don't specialize in events, so I honestly don't know. Allahu alam. Yes.
So it's no secret that thinking is huge. Even if you look at the ayahs from Ibrahim alayhi salam, if you look at the ayahs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ibrahim alayhi salam, we know that thinking is huge in Islam. So how come today we're declined in our thinking, and how do we get back to where we used to be?
Very good. As far as
what causes that? How do we get out of this?
yes, as far as, and we have to understand, there are different ways of thinking and different levels of thinking, right? I can say, you know what? Hey, that's a nice hoodie you got, right? That is more of a thought that may be shallow, even though it's not negative. It's no negative connotation. Nice dress you're wearing. Hey, cool shoes. I like those shoes. It's cool, but as far as thinking is concerned, without any negative connotation, that's considered shallow thinking, right? But if I say to somebody, you know what, this is pretty amazing the way my hand works. I love it. That's awesome. I wonder how that happens. That's deep, right? That's deep thinking. Because you're actually stopping and you're looking at, he's going like this. It's awesome. Thank you. And that's a good way of thinking, right? But now, if I want to be a little enlightened in my thinking, I have to say, you know what? My hand, the way it works, it's nice. And I think it's so cool how I don't even have to tell myself to move my hand. It naturally happens when I want to do it on demand, right? Where did that come from? How do I have that tendency? You could go through the science route if you want, no problem. The brain sends signals, motor signals, whatever you want to call it, right? But you can be in awe of that, and you're supposed to. Allah says to be in awe of that. And then you could say, okay, who then created that sense? Because I have the power, or I was given this power to do that. Who gave me that power? Well, where did I come from? My parents, right? I came from my parents. Where did they come from? Where did they come from? Where did they come from? Okay, somebody had to create all of this, and that's just a human being. There's billions of different organisms, microorganisms, right? Where did all of that come from? And that's where I think Brother Asim was talking about, where Ibrahim alayhi salam was wrestling with the nature and seeing, wait, the sun, this, right? The sun, this has to be my God. Wait, it goes away, but it's limited, right? So now I know my God can't be limited. My Creator can't be limited, right? So this is a very basic way of thinking, that everything you do in your life, think on a very simple basis, but on this very enlightened manner. Why am I doing this? Why am I getting, and I'm not going to talk about validity or anything. That's not my point here. Something very relative to you. Why is it that I have to get a loan for my education? Right? Why is it that something that should be, I shouldn't have to pay for maybe, or some philosophies believe you shouldn't have to pay for it, but why am I having to pay for this? What is causing this? And then you start going down this road and you say, is there something I can do in this that is encouraging the good and forbidding the evil, for instance? And as far as my Lord creating me and putting here for a purpose, was that purpose, now you start thinking, was that purpose to eat and drink and get an education and get money and then chill? And that's accomplishment, that's success? Is that my vision? Or is that just a mode to do something else, or a means to do something else? The problem is sometimes we make that the mode and the means of everything, and that's what we have defined success by. If I say to a person, hey, what is success? Success is making at least $1 million. If I don't make that, I'm not successful. Guess what? If he never makes $1 million, he's always going to hate himself or have some type of inferiority complex because he didn't have $1 million, because he equated that to success. Someone can say, living in Oakbrook, for instance, in the suburbs somewhere, and having this, having a wife and children, that's success. Having money, or whatever the case may be, that's success. But the intellectual and the enlightened thinker, what he says is, this is a means, and my Creator gave me this as a sign of Him, but what does He actually want from me? Because He did give me something. When you're given something, you have a responsibility, right? What is that responsibility? What is the responsibility of Adam alayhi salam? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran. What was that responsibility, right? To be the ambassador of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His vicegerent on this dunya. Meaning I represent everything fully to the best of my ability, and get in touch with those people at least who can help me make sure that everything is implemented that my Creator wants from me. If I can't do that, I have to make sure at least I start with my progeny that Ibrahim alayhi salam did. But I have to address people eventually, because human beings are human beings, but my Creator wants something from me, and He wants to see results. If your teacher wants you to study something, they want to see results. In a similar way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He creates something, He wants results. And He wants to make sure that Allah's deen is uplifted and prevalent on this dunya. That's what it is, plain and simple. How do I do that? Yes, you can do that by getting a college degree. Now you can see where the paradigm shifts now. Everything I do is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make sure Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is understood by everybody, and the Creator is understood. Right? So that is one facet and one way, or just scratching the surface of thinking, right? But I think inshallah I'm going to inform the other brother that comes after me, and if I have an opportunity, I think we should have just one series, and may Allah reward the brothers who organized this, or sisters. I don't know exactly who was involved in this, but we should have what the Muslim thinks and how he's expected to think through the Quran and Sunnah. And it's actually very simple, it's not very hard. But the thing is that we've complicated ourselves in philosophies to the point that it becomes actually very hard to even think about responsibility. We don't want to even go anything near. If it's responsibility, you know what, I'm going to take another route. This is responsibility, I'm going to take another route. No, but that's not the reason why we were created. Allah created us to be responsible for something, right? What else, inshallah? Did I kind of get to what you wanted? And some of these are very general. I just want to make sure that everybody understands the wide spectrum of the deen, inshallah. Anything else? Going once? Going twice? Yes, Hatim.
One last one question.
Oh, and by the way, if anybody needs to leave, it's not going to be rude if you get up and leave. It's totally cool. We're just chilling right now. Yes?
Just kind of like sort of parallel to left with the Muslims. He's obviously a kid who does most of the stuff we hear about, like the stories and stuff.
Yeah.
He's at the same time he's very respectful to his parents. But like, what is like a way, like if we kind of parallel it to now, that we're
Very good.
kind of very grown kids forever. Like, how do we kind of, like, you know, how do we still do our responsibilities while trying to be respectful?
Very good. Basically, how do we, without, alhamdulillah, inshallah, none of our parents worship idols, but how do we become Ibrahim alayhi salam? Number one thing is, one thing you have to understand is, you will never ever convince everybody, even if it's your parents, of something. Right? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, because He's teaching us about ourselves. If we believe that Allah tells us that every time, and this is I want everyone just to remember, because many people ask me, what should the mindset of an individual be when I open the Quran? Do I open the Quran just for the sake of hasanat or ajr? Do I open the Quran because, where do I start from? Do I start from the beginning of the surah? Do I start from Surah Al-Fatiha? Do I start from Surah Al-Baqarah? Can I just open everywhere and say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, and read? The first thing should be the mindset. The mindset is that every time I open the Quran, Allah is teaching me about myself. He taught us about Adam, so He told us about our father. He even told us the very senses that we have, right? And I'm going to answer your question. I just want there to be a strong foundation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the human being was created halu'a. He was created in haste. A very hasty manner, and he is a very hasty being, right? What happens when you're stuck in traffic and you're 15 minutes late for an interview? You don't care about rules and regulations, you don't care about speed limits, you don't care about shoulders. You know what? And you're going to start rolling down windows, even though it's your fault, and start cursing at people. Na'udhu billah. Right? And it's your own fault. But you're a hasty being. Allah told us about that. He told you you're a hasty being. But how do you remedy that? Right? Also in the Quran. Also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about our very nature. Right? In all of us college, well, when you were in high school, every time you got a report card that you didn't like, or something, or some type of news, or you broke somebody's window, and you tried to hide that evidence, right? What do? Forget about everything, close your door. Oh Allah, from now on I'll be the best Muslim ever, right? And if you take me out of this misery, I promise I'll be the best Muslim, I'll be the best worshipper, right? And when that misery is lifted, guess what happens? You forget about all that dua you made. What does Allah tell us in the Quran? وَإِذَا مَسَّ الْإِنسَانَ ضُرٌّ. And if there is a calamity that touches, not even befalls, وَإِذَا مَسَّ الْإِنسَانَ ضُرٌّ, some type of calamity, right? دعا ربه منيبا إليه. He went to his creator as if there was nothing else. Munib, meaning that everything that he sees, he becomes tunnel vision. Everything else he distracts, it becomes blurry, and he goes towards his creator like he never went to him before. وَإِذَا خَوَّلَهُ نِعْمَةً. And when Allah befriends him a nice comfort, what happens? نَسِيَ مَا كَانَ يَدْعُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ قَبْلِ. He forgot all those du'as he did. And Allah tells us about this in the book. So if we open it up in the Quran, I say I want to learn about my psyche, in myself, in my behaviors, in my emotional status, in my situation. Let me open my book and see what's inside of there. That being said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this setup in life where we are supposed to learn how we deal with everybody, even our parents. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says now in the Quran, coming to your point, even if they are people that associate partners with Allah, be generous to them, but don't listen to them when they ask you to do the haram, but be very respectful about it. Don't be like, I'm not listening to you, you're not a Muslim. We have a dilemma in society sometimes. People are like, you know what, I don't love my parents anymore. I met some individuals, and they were taught, unfortunately, by people, you know what, I don't have to love my parents anymore because I'm a convert or I'm a revert and I'm a Muslim and they're not, so I don't need to love them anymore. No. You still have to love them, but you have to have that human love. There's two types of love, right? There's a type of love which is that human love that you're naturally, that you're supposed to have, and if you don't, there's something unhealthy about you, whether it's for your parents or whether it's for your wife, because your wife doesn't have to be Muslim, right? But you still have to love her. But the love that is with the bond of the aqeedah, which is our belief that if they tell you to do something that contradicts the ultimate loyalty, which is your creator, then you don't listen, but you're respectful about it. Right? So if something contradicts what your creator has told you to do, you stick with what your creator do it, but you smile, you're nice, generous, gifts to your parents or your relatives, whatever the case may be, friends. But you have to be like, you know what, when you're involved in this, I can't be involved in this, but I still don't think of this as a thing of disrespect to you, of your parents, right? It's more of, you know what, this is where the truth comes out now. And this should be in stone. I'm going to conclude with this. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that the first you love is who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then his messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then who? Your mother. and then your father, and then your progeny. So it's safe to say, based on textual evidences, if you haven't taken your religion on a leap of faith, on full conviction on the evidences around you, and you're convinced of that religion now, or that way of life, that I love my Creator more and have more loyalty to my Creator than my parents. But even that Creator is so merciful, He told me to be generous to them even though they are associating partners with Him. So if it comes to them even doing something haram, right? I know many individuals, may Allah protect these individuals, that they want to do something which is in accordance with the Quran, but their parents say, you know what, you're not going to do that. He says, I have to do it. This is a dilemma, especially when you're dependent upon them. At times, if you're living under their roof, this is a very big mujahada. This is such a huge struggle that everything I do is because of them, and now they're still supporting me, and I'm supposed to disagree with them? Allahu Akbar. This is a very, very hard trial and tribulation. May Allah protect us from this fitna, because now you have to choose but still be respectful. Let me give you an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He said, do not curse the deities or the lords that these people are associating partners with. The Creator is saying this. Why? Because they're going to curse Allah bighayri ilm. They're going to curse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they don't have knowledge about this. They don't even know who their Creator is. So Allah, out of His infinite mercy, He said, even though I'm the Creator that created these individuals and they create these idols, don't even make fun of those idols in front of them or belittle them, because what are they going to do? They're going to belittle your Creator that you love more than your mother and your father and your own progeny. Right? Which is why, even with our progeny, it's very unacceptable. We say, you know what, it's Ramadan, but guess what? You have finals, you don't have to fast. It happens, and may Allah protect us from this fitna, because sometimes we love our children so much it overrides our love for our Creator. And it can happen. It's a very easy trap to fall in, right? So some people will be like, you know what, you don't have to fast. It's in the summer, but guess what? You got to study. Your school's more important. Actually, it's not. Your school is a way to get close to your Creator, not a way to compromise with your Creator, right? So to answer your question, no matter what people say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do something, but even then, out of His infinite mercy, He told us how to behave with them in a very nice, noble, right, manner, inshallah. To answer your question. Abdullah, do you have any questions? So, I'll conclude with that, inshallah. I've taken a lot of your time, inshallah. Wa akhir da'wan, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. If you guys want to